The glass shattered at exactly 11:47 p.m., a sound that cut through the suburban silence like a blade through silk. Staff Sergeant Maya Chen had been folding tiny dinosaur pajamas on the Henderson's leather couch when the first window gave way somewhere in the kitchen. Her hands, still warm from pulling the laundry from the dryer, froze mid-fold as her military training kicked in with the precision of a Swiss watch. 3 floors above, 4-year-old Emma Henderson slept peacefully in her princess-themed bedroom, her breathing steady and innocent, completely unaware that her world was about to collide with Maya's past in ways that would redefine what it meant to protect and serve. 6-year-old Jake Henderson lay in the adjacent room, clutching his stuffed T-Rex, his small chest rising and falling in the rhythm of childhood dreams where monsters were imaginary and heroes always won. Maya's transformation was instantaneous and terrifying in its efficiency. The gentle babysitter who had spent the evening reading bedtime stories and making animal-shaped pancakes vanished, replaced by the combat-trained military police officer who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and had never lost a person under her protection. Her brown eyes, which had been soft with maternal warmth just moments before, now held the cold calculation of someone who understood that violence was sometimes the only language that evil understood. The house at 1247 Maple Street had always been a sanctuary. Built in 1987 by a local contractor who believed that homes should feel like fortresses, it boasted thick walls, solid oak doors, and windows that were positioned strategically to provide clear sightlines of the surrounding neighborhood. The Hendersons had chosen this house specifically because it felt safe, because Karen Henderson could look out from any window and feel like her children were protected by more than just locks and alarm systems. But Maya knew that no house was truly safe, that security was an illusion that could be shattered as easily as tempered glass. She had learned this lesson in Kandahar province, where she had watched insurgents turn family homes into battlegrounds, where she had seen how quickly the sacred could become profane. The difference was that tonight she wasn't just defending territory or following orders. Tonight she was protecting 2 innocent lives that had been entrusted to her care. The intruders moved with the clumsy confidence of amateurs, their footsteps heavy on the hardwood floors of the kitchen. Maya could hear at least 3 distinct sets of footfalls, possibly 4, and the way they were communicating suggested they weren't professionals. Real professionals would have disabled the power, would have known about the silent alarm system that Karen Henderson had installed last year after a string of break-ins in the neighboring subdivision. These were opportunists, probably local kids who had graduated from petty theft to home invasion, thinking they could intimidate their way to easy money. They had no idea they were about to encounter a woman who had spent 4 years learning how to neutralize threats with the efficiency of a surgeon and the determination of a mother protecting her young. Maya's phone was in her pocket, but calling 911 would take too long. The Elmwood Police Department was understaffed and overworked, and their average response time to this neighborhood was 12 to 15 minutes on a good night. In 12 minutes, these intruders could do irreparable damage to the children sleeping upstairs. In 12 minutes, Emma's laughter could be silenced forever, and Jake's dreams could turn into nightmares that would follow him for the rest of his life. The living room where Maya stood was a testament to the Henderson family's love and prosperity. Family photos lined the mantelpiece above a gas fireplace that Karen had insisted on despite her husband's protests about the expense. The photos told the story of a family that had worked hard for everything they had. David Henderson's graduation from law school, Karen's promotion to regional manager at the marketing firm, Emma's first steps, Jake's first day of kindergarten. These weren't people who had inherited wealth or stumbled into fortune. They were the American dream personified, and Maya would be damned if she let anyone destroy that. On the coffee table sat Jake's latest art project, a drawing he had made for Maya during dinner. It was a crayon masterpiece depicting Maya as a superhero, complete with a cape and a giant smile, standing next to Jake and Emma outside their house. The words, "My Hero Maya," were scrawled across the top in his careful 6-year-old handwriting, each letter a small monument to trust and admiration. Maya had planned to take it home with her, to add it to the small collection of drawings and thank-you notes from the children she had cared for over the past 2 years, since leaving active duty. The sound of heavy boots on the kitchen tiles grew closer, accompanied by hushed voices that carried the excitement and nervousness of young men who thought they were about to score big. Maya could make out fragments of conversation, something about jewelry, something about a safe, something about making sure no one was home. The last comment almost made her smile. They had done their homework poorly, assuming that the midweek absence of the family car meant the house was empty. They hadn't counted on Maya's 10-year-old Honda Civic parked discreetly around the corner. Hadn't anticipated that the Hendersons would trust their most precious possessions to a woman who looked more like a college student than a warrior. Maya moved with the silent precision she had learned during night patrols in hostile territory, her bare feet making no sound on the plush carpet as she positioned herself in the shadows near the staircase. From here, she could guard the route to the children while maintaining a clear view of the kitchen entrance. Her mind automatically began cataloging potential weapons: the heavy crystal vase on the side table, the fireplace poker, the solid oak coffee table that could serve as both cover and projectile. But Maya's most dangerous weapon wasn't made of metal or wood. It was the knowledge that she had been trained to protect, that she had sworn an oath to defend the innocent, and that she had never broken a promise to a child. Emma Henderson had asked her, with the serious solemnity that only 4-year-olds possessed, to keep the monsters away while Mommy and Daddy were at their anniversary dinner. Maya had promised, sealing the vow with a pinky swear that was more binding than any military oath she had ever taken. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked toward midnight, each second bringing the confrontation closer. Outside, Maple Street continued its peaceful slumber, unaware that in the house with the white picket fence and the tire swing in the backyard, a guardian angel with combat training was about to remind 3 young criminals why military police officers never really retire from the business of protecting the innocent. The question that hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle was simple but profound. How far was Maya willing to go to keep her promise? And more importantly, these intruders prepared to discover that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who looks like she couldn't hurt a fly. Maya's journey to this moment had begun not in the mountains of Afghanistan or the training grounds of Fort Leonard Wood, but in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Oakland, California, where she had learned her first lessons about protection and sacrifice. At 8 years old, she had become the guardian of her younger brother Tommy when their mother's addiction to prescription painkillers transformed their home from a place of love into a battlefield of broken promises and empty refrigerators. The transition from military service to civilian babysitting had been more difficult than Maya ever admitted to anyone, including her therapist at the VA hospital. Dr. Patricia Sanchez, a kind woman with patient eyes and an understanding of trauma that came from years of working with veterans, had warned Maya that the adjustment period would be challenging. "You've been responsible for the safety of entire units," Dr. Sanchez had explained during their sessions. "Learning to channel that protective instinct into civilian life requires a complete rewiring of how you process threat assessment." Maya's typical day began at 5:30 a.m. with a run through Elmwood Park, the same 5-mile loop she had been running for the past 18 months since settling in this quiet suburb 30 miles outside the city. The running wasn't just exercise, it was reconnaissance. She knew every potential hiding spot, every exit route, and every house where lights stayed on too late or went dark too early. Her neighbors thought she was just a health-conscious young woman who enjoyed morning exercise. They had no idea she was conducting daily security assessments of their entire neighborhood. After her run, Maya would return to her small apartment above Mrs. Patterson's bakery on Main Street. The apartment smelled perpetually of fresh bread and cinnamon rolls, a comforting contrast to the sterile military housing she had called home for so many years. Mrs. Patterson, a 73-year-old widow who had lost her husband to cancer the previous year, had become something of a surrogate grandmother to Maya. Their relationship had developed slowly, built on shared cups of coffee and the kind of quiet understanding that exists between two women who had both learned to be strong in the face of loss. "You remind me of my daughter Sarah," Mrs. Patterson had told Maya one morning, pressing a warm blueberry muffin into her hands. She had that same look in her eyes, like she was always watching the horizon for something coming. Sarah Patterson had died in a car accident 15 years earlier, leaving behind a husband and two small children who lived in Seattle now and visited their grandmother twice a year, if she was lucky. Maya's babysitting business had started almost by accident. Karen Henderson, desperate to find someone reliable to watch Emma and Jake while she attended a work conference, had mentioned her dilemma to Mrs. Patterson during her weekly bread pickup. Mrs. Patterson, always eager to help her young tenant, had suggested Maya without hesitation. "She's good with children," Mrs. Patterson had assured Karen, "and she's responsible, very responsible." What Mrs. Patterson hadn't mentioned was that Maya's definition of responsible had been shaped by experiences that most babysitters couldn't even imagine. Maya's approach to childcare was meticulous in ways that bordered on military precision. She conducted security sweeps of every house before the parents left, checking window locks, testing alarm systems, and identifying potential escape routes. She memorized the locations of fire extinguishers, first aid kits, and the quickest path to the nearest hospital. She kept detailed logs of the children's activities, their moods, their eating patterns, and any unusual occurrences, no matter how minor. The other parents in the neighborhood had begun to notice Maya's unique qualifications, though they interpreted her vigilance as exceptional dedication rather than combat training. Word spread through the PTA network and neighborhood social media groups about the babysitter who never canceled, never showed up late, and somehow managed to keep even the most difficult children calm and happy. What they didn't understand was that Maya's ability to remain calm under pressure had been forged in situations where panic meant death, where split-second decisions determined whether everyone went home alive. Maya's relationship with the Henderson children had evolved into something deeper than a professional arrangement. Emma, with her fierce independence and curious nature, reminded Maya of herself at that age. The little girl had a habit of asking probing questions that revealed a mind already learning to see beyond surface appearances. "Maya, why do you always check all the doors before Mommy and Daddy leave?" Emma had asked one evening, her blue eyes serious and thoughtful. Maya had explained it as making sure everyone stays safe, but she could see that Emma understood there was more to the story. Jake, quieter and more introspective than his sister, had formed an attachment to Maya that both touched and terrified her. He had taken to drawing pictures of Maya in various heroic scenarios: Maya fighting dragons, Maya flying through the sky, Maya standing guard outside his bedroom door. His instinctive trust in her ability to protect him had awakened something maternal in Maya that she hadn't known existed. She found herself lying awake at night, planning ways to teach the children about safety without frightening them, wondering how to prepare them for a world that wasn't always as safe as their quiet suburban neighborhood suggested. The contradiction between Maya's gentle demeanor with the children and her capacity for violence created an internal tension that she struggled to manage. With Emma and Jake, she was patient, nurturing, creative in her approach to discipline and education. She helped with homework, read bedtime stories with different voices for each character, and had mastered the art of making ordinary activities feel like adventures. But beneath that maternal surface was a warrior who had been trained to neutralize threats with ruthless efficiency. Dr. Sanchez had helped Maya understand that this duality wasn't a character flaw, but rather a strength that needed to be properly channeled. "You're not two different people," she had explained during one of their sessions. "You're one person with multiple skill sets. The challenge is learning when to deploy which skills." The therapy sessions had helped Maya develop strategies for managing her hypervigilance, techniques for distinguishing between genuine threats and the phantom dangers that her mind sometimes conjured from shadows and unexpected sounds. Maya's evenings were often spent at the Henderson house, even when she wasn't officially babysitting. Karen and David had begun inviting her to family dinners, including her in birthday parties and holiday celebrations. She had become part of their extended family, a role that both comforted and worried her. The closer she became to the children, the more she understood how much she had to lose if anything happened to them. The other families in Maya's babysitting rotation had their own dynamics, their own needs, but none had touched her heart quite like the Hendersons. There was the Morrison family, with 3 boys under the age of 10 whose energy could power a small city. Maya had learned to channel their boundless enthusiasm into structured activities that exhausted them enough to ensure peaceful bedtimes. The Garcias had twin daughters who were brilliant but challenging, requiring a babysitter who could help with advanced mathematics homework while simultaneously managing their competitive sibling rivalry. Each family had taught Maya something different about civilian life, about the rhythms of normal existence that she had never experienced as a child and had been absent from during her military years. She learned about soccer practice schedules, parent-teacher conferences, the complex social dynamics of playground politics. She discovered that parenting in peacetime came with its own set of challenges, its own fears and anxieties that were no less real for being different from the dangers she had faced in combat zones. Maya's financial situation was stable but modest. Her military disability payments combined with her babysitting income provided enough for her simple lifestyle, but she had been carefully saving money with a specific goal in mind. She wanted to open a children's safety and self-defense program, something that would teach kids age-appropriate ways to protect themselves while building confidence and awareness. The idea had been growing in her mind for months, inspired by her observations of how unprepared most children were to emergency situations. The program would be different from traditional martial arts classes. Maya envisioned teaching children about situational awareness, about trusting their instincts, and about the difference between being cautious and being paralyzed by fear. She wanted to create a space where children could learn to be their own first line of defense without losing their innocence or their ability to trust the world around them. Maya's personal relationships outside of her work with children were limited but meaningful. Besides Mrs. Patterson and Dr. Sanchez, she maintained contact with several members of her former unit through social media and occasional phone calls. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who was now working as a police officer in Denver, had become something of a mentor, helping Maya navigate the transition to civilian life. Lieutenant Colonel James, her former commanding officer, sent her birthday cards and Christmas presents, and had written one of the recommendation letters that helped her establish her babysitting business. The isolation that many veterans experienced had been cushioned for Maya by her work with children and her growing connections in the Elmwood community. She volunteered at the local food bank on weekends, helped elderly neighbors with grocery shopping and yard work, and had even joined the neighborhood book club at Mrs. Patterson's insistence. The other book club members, mostly women in their 50s and 60s, had adopted Maya as a honorary daughter, including her in their social activities and offering unsolicited advice about everything from career choices to dating. Maya's romantic life was practically non-existent, a fact that concerned Mrs. Patterson more than it concerned Maya herself. She had dated occasionally since leaving the military, but most civilian men seemed intimidated by her independence and intensity. The few veterans she had met through support groups understood her better, but Maya found it difficult to build relationships with men who shared her particular set of experiences and challenges. She sometimes wondered if she would ever find someone who could accept both sides of her nature, the gentle caregiver and the trained warrior. Tonight, as she prepared for what would become the most important confrontation of her civilian life, Maya thought about all the people who had shaped her journey to this moment. Tommy, now a college sophomore studying engineering, who still called her every Sunday to update her on his classes and his girlfriend. Dr. Sanchez, who had taught her that strength and vulnerability could coexist. Mrs. Patterson, who had shown her that family could be chosen as well as inherited. The Henderson family, who had welcomed her into their lives with the kind of trust that was both a gift and a responsibility. Each of these relationships had contributed to the person Maya had become, someone who understood that protection wasn't just about neutralizing threats, but about preserving the things that made life worth living. The children, sleeping upstairs, represented everything she had been fighting to protect throughout her military career and beyond. They were innocence and potential, hope and future, all wrapped up in dinosaur pajamas and princess nightgowns. As the intruders moved through the kitchen, Maya felt the familiar calm that preceded action.
This wasn't the adrenaline-fueled panic that civilians experience in crisis situations. This was the focused clarity that came from years of training, from the knowledge that she possessed the skills necessary to control the situation and protect the people who mattered most. The transformation from gentle babysitter to protective warrior wasn't a switch that Maya flipped. It was more like a door that opened, revealing the full depth of who she was and what she was capable of when the people she loved were threatened. Tonight, 3 young criminals were about to discover that some doors, once opened, could never be closed again. The first confrontation began when the youngest intruder, emboldened by what he perceived as an empty house, decided to head toward the staircase. Maya watched him approach her position with the casual arrogance of someone who had never faced real resistance, his crowbar swinging loosely at his side as he whispered to his companions about checking for jewelry upstairs. He was 3 steps from the bottom of the staircase when Maya emerged from the shadows like a nightmare given form. "Stop right there," she said, her voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that could make hardened soldiers freeze mid-stride. The young man's reaction was immediate and telling. He stumbled backwards, his crowbar clattering to the floor as his nervous system processed the presence of another human being in a space he had assumed was empty. His ski mask had slipped, revealing a face that couldn't have been older than Jake's teenage babysitters, marked with the kind of desperation that came from too many wrong choices, compounded by too few right opportunities. "Who the hell are you?" The leader of the group stepped forward. His own weapon, a tire iron that looked like it had been grabbed from a car trunk, raised defensively. His voice carried the forced bravado of someone trying to convince himself as much as others that he was in control of the situation. Maya studied the 3 young men with the clinical detachment of a predator assessing potential threats. The leader was older, maybe 25, with the wiry build of someone who had spent time in county lockup and the kind of facial tattoos that spoke to a criminal career that had started early and progressed predictably. The second intruder was heavier set, nervous energy radiating from him in waves as he shifted his weight from foot to foot, gripping a baseball bat with hands that were visibly shaking. These weren't hardened criminals. Desperate young men who had made a series of increasingly poor decisions that had led them to this moment. "I'm the babysitter," Maya said, her tone conversational despite the circumstances. "And you're in the wrong house, on the wrong night, threatening the wrong children." She moved with deliberate precision, positioning herself so that her body blocked any direct path to the staircase while maintaining clear sight lines to all 3 intruders. Her bare feet found purchase on the hardwood floor, her weight distributed in the stance that had become second nature during countless hours of hand-to-hand combat training. The leader laughed, a harsh sound that revealed both his misunderstanding of the situation and his growing unease. "Look, lady, we don't want to hurt anyone. Just stay out of our way and nobody gets hurt. We're just here for some quick cash, maybe some electronics, nothing personal." His attempt at reassurance revealed his inexperience. Professional criminals knew better than to engage in extended conversations that could be used to identify them later. Maya's response was swift and devastating in its precision. She moved forward in a fluid motion that seemed to fold time and space. Her military training translated civilian furniture into tactical advantages. The heavy crystal vase from the side table became an extension of her arm, connecting with the leader's wrist with enough force to send his tire iron spinning across the room. Before he could process what had happened, Maya had pivoted, using her momentum to drive her elbow into a solar plexus with the kind of controlled violence that left him gasping on the floor, conscious but completely incapacitated. The second intruder, the nervous one with the baseball bat, swung wildly in Maya's direction, his panic overriding any tactical consideration. Maya ducked beneath his swing with the fluid grace of someone who had been trained to turn an opponent's aggression into their weakness. She caught his extended arm, using his own momentum to throw him over her hip in a textbook judo throw that sent him crashing into the coffee table. The sound of splintering wood filled the room, as Jake's superhero drawing fluttered to the floor, now marked with the blood from the intruder's split lip. The youngest criminal, the one who had been heading toward the staircase, had recovered enough to make a grab for his dropped crowbar. Maya was already moving before his fingers touched the metal, her foot connecting with his wrist in a precise strike that sent the weapon skittering into the corner. She followed up with a knee to his midsection that folded him over like a closing book, his breath leaving his lungs in a whoosh that spoke to both the accuracy and the restraint of Maya's technique. Within 90 seconds, 3 armed intruders had been neutralized by a woman in yoga pants and an Elmwood elementary school t-shirt. But Maya knew that the confrontation was far from over. These 3 were amateurs, but they were also desperate, and desperation made people unpredictable in ways that professional training couldn't always anticipate. "Please," the leader gasped from his position on the floor, his voice now stripped of its earlier bravado. "We didn't know anyone was here. We just need money, man. I got debts, my girl's pregnant, I can't go back to county." His story spilled out in fragments revealing the kind of circumstances that Maya had seen destroy young lives in the neighborhoods where she had grown up. But sympathy didn't change the fact that these 3 had chosen to threaten the children sleeping upstairs. Maya retrieved her phone from her pocket with one hand while keeping her attention fixed on the 3 intruders. Her call to 911 was brief and professional. "This is Maya Chen at 1247 Maple Street. I have 3 suspects down, attempted breaking and entering, no injuries requiring immediate medical attention. Send units and a supervisor." She provided her military ID number, a detail that would ensure the responding officers understood they were dealing with someone who knew how to handle crisis situations. The dispatcher's voice carried the kind of calm efficiency that Maya recognized from military communications. "Units are en route. ETA 12 minutes. Are you in a secure location?" Maya's response was equally professional. "Affirmative. Subjects are contained. No ongoing threat to civilians." What she didn't mention was that her definition of contained was subject to change if any of the 3 men made another move toward the staircase. While they waited for the police to arrive, Maya began to piece together the larger picture of what had brought these 3 to the Henderson house. The leader, whose name she learned was Marcus Thompson, had been released from county jail 3 weeks earlier on a robbery charge that had been plea bargained down to time served. His girlfriend was indeed pregnant, due in 2 months, and he had been unable to find work with his criminal record. The second intruder, Kevin Martinez, was facing eviction from his apartment and had been sleeping in his car for the past week. The youngest, Tyler Bennett, was 19 years old and struggling with a drug addiction that had cost him his job at a local auto parts store. Their target selection had been opportunistic rather than strategic. They had noticed that the Hendersons' car was gone and had assumed the house was empty. The neighborhood had been chosen because it looked prosperous enough to contain valuable items, but not wealthy enough to have sophisticated security systems. They had expected to be in and out within 10 minutes, taking whatever they could easily carry and fence for quick cash. Maya found herself in the strange position of simultaneously maintaining tactical control over potential threats while also beginning to understand them as human beings, caught in circumstances that were tragically common in communities where opportunity was scarce and support systems had failed. Her military experience had taught her to see enemies as abstract threats to be neutralized, but her work with children and families had developed her capacity for empathy in ways that complicated her response to situations like this. "Look, I get it," Maya said, her voice carrying a note of understanding that seemed to surprise all 3 men. "I've seen what desperation can do to good people. I've watched kids from my neighborhood make these same choices because they couldn't see any other way forward." She was thinking of her own brother Tommy, who had been offered opportunities to join neighborhood crews when they were teenagers. The difference was that Tommy had Maya watching over him, protecting him from the kind of decisions that led to breaking into houses in suburban neighborhoods. But understanding didn't change the fundamental equation. These 3 men had made a choice to threaten the safety of innocent children, and Maya's primary obligation was to the little girl and boy sleeping upstairs who trusted her to keep them safe. Her empathy was real, but it was tempered by the knowledge that good intentions didn't undo bad decisions, and that the children in her care deserved protection regardless of the circumstances that had led to this confrontation. The sound of sirens in the distance signaled the approach of the Elmwood Police Department, but Maya remained vigilant. She had learned in combat zones that the most dangerous moments often came when people thought the crisis was over, when adrenaline began to fade and attention started to wander.
She kept her position between the intruders and the staircase, her body language making it clear that any attempt to move toward the children would be met with immediate and decisive resistance. Officer Sarah Mitchell was the first responder to arrive, a 10-year veteran of the Elmwood PD who had built a reputation for competence and professionalism in difficult situations. Maya recognized the type immediately, someone who had chosen law enforcement as a calling rather than just a career, who understood that real police work was more about protecting communities than enforcing authority. Officer Mitchell's partner, James Park, was younger and less experienced, but he moved with the careful attention of someone who understood that domestic situations could escalate without warning. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Mitchell. Can you give me a brief rundown of the situation?" The officer's tone was respectful but professional, acknowledging Maya's apparent control over the scene while establishing proper police authority. Maya's response was crisp and organized, providing the essential information without unnecessary detail. 3 subjects entered through the kitchen window at approximately 11:47 p.m. I neutralized them using non-lethal force. No weapons were discharged, no serious injuries sustained. 2 children are asleep upstairs, parents are out for the evening and have been contacted. What Maya didn't mention was the complex emotional landscape that the confrontation had revealed. Seeing these 3 young men reduced to desperate circumstances had awakened memories of her own childhood, of the thin line that separated her brother Tommy from the kind of life that led to breaking into other people's homes. She thought about the systemic failures that created situations where young men saw crime as their most viable option, about the communities that had been abandoned by institutions that were supposed to provide support and opportunity.
Officer Mitchell's handling of the situation demonstrated the kind of professional competence that Maya respected. She treated the 3 intruders with dignity while maintaining appropriate security precautions, taking their statements with the thoroughness of someone who understood that every detail might be relevant in court proceedings. She also recognized Maya's military background and showed the kind of respect that one professional extends to another, asking for Maya's assessment of the threat level and the likelihood of additional accomplices. The arrival of Sergeant Robert Chen, no relation to Maya despite the shared surname, brought additional authority to the scene. Sergeant Chen had 20 years of experience with the Elmwood PD and had seen every variation of breaking and entering that suburban crime could produce. His questioning of Maya was more detailed, focused not just on the immediate incident, but on the larger patterns that might indicate whether this was an isolated event or part of a broader criminal enterprise targeting the neighborhood. "These 3 don't fit the profile of professional burglars," Sergeant Chen observed, echoing Maya's own assessment. "This looks more like desperation than criminal enterprise. But that doesn't make them less dangerous, especially if they had encountered resistance from untrained civilians." His implication was clear. Maya's military background had prevented what could have been a much more serious situation if the intruders had encountered a typical suburban family unprepared for violent confrontation. The processing of the crime scene took nearly 2 hours, during which Maya had to balance her role as witness and victim with her primary responsibility to the children upstairs. Emma had awakened briefly around 1:30 a.m., coming to the top of the staircase in her princess nightgown to ask about the unusual sounds and flashing lights outside. Maya met her at the top of the stairs, scooping the little girl into her arms and explaining that some bad men had tried to come into the house, but that the police had come to take them away. "Did you protect us, Maya?" Emma asked with the directness that only small children possessed, her blue eyes searching Maya's face for reassurance. Maya's answer was simple and honest. "Yes, sweetheart, I kept you safe, just like I promised." Emma nodded solemnly and allowed Maya to carry her back to her bedroom, where she fell asleep almost immediately, secure in the knowledge that her protector had fulfilled her promise. Jake never woke up during the entire incident, sleeping peacefully through sirens and police radios and the controlled chaos of a crime scene investigation. Maya checked on him several times throughout the night, watching his small chest rise and fall in the rhythm of innocent dreams, marveling at the resilience of childhood that allowed him to sleep undisturbed while adults dealt with the complications of a world that was sometimes darker than bedtime stories suggested. The emotional aftermath of the confrontation was more complex than the physical resolution had been. Maya found herself thinking about Marcus Thompson's pregnant girlfriend, about Kevin Martinez sleeping in his car, about Tyler Bennett's struggle with addiction. These weren't abstract criminal statistics, they were human beings whose bad choices had collided with her protective instincts in ways that left everyone changed by the encounter. Dr. Sanchez would later help Maya process these conflicted feelings during their next therapy session. You can feel empathy for people while maintaining appropriate boundaries, she would explain. Understanding why someone makes destructive choices doesn't mean you have to accept the consequences of those choices when they threaten the people you're responsible for protecting. But that conversation was still in the future. Tonight, as the police cars pulled away from Maple Street and the neighborhood returned to its peaceful slumber, Maya remained at the Henderson house, maintaining her vigil over the children who had slept through their first real encounter with the violence that existed in the world beyond their quiet suburb. She sat in the living room, surrounded by the evidence of the evening's confrontation: broken furniture, scattered glass, blood drops on the hardwood floor, and thought about the invisible line that separated safety from danger, innocence from experience, protection from violence.
The three intruders were now in custody, beginning a journey through the criminal justice system that would likely end with prison sentences that would further limit their future opportunities. Maya understood that their arrest was necessary, that society required consequences for choices that threatened innocent people. But she also understood that their stories didn't end with their booking photos, that somewhere there were people who loved them and worried about them and hoped for their redemption. By 3 a.m., Maya had cleaned up the broken glass and rearranged the furniture to minimize the visible evidence of the night's events. The children didn't need to wake up to a house that looked like a battlefield, didn't need constant reminders that their safe space had been violated. When Karen and David Henderson returned from their anniversary dinner, they would find their children safe and their home secure, with only Maya's calm recounting of the evening's events to indicate that anything unusual had occurred. But Maya knew that the confrontation had changed something fundamental in her relationship with the Henderson family and with her role as protector of other people's children. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, had revealed capabilities that transformed her from a trusted caregiver into something more complex and potentially more dangerous. The question that would follow her into sleep and into the days that followed was whether that transformation was a blessing or a burden, and what it meant for the future she was trying to build in this quiet suburban community. Dawn broke over Maple Street with the gentle persistence of routine. But for Maya Chen, the morning light illuminated a world that had fundamentally shifted during the dark hours of the previous night. She sat at the Hendersons' kitchen table, nursing her third cup of coffee and watching Emma and Jake eat their cereal with the blissful ignorance of children who had slept through their first encounter with real danger. The normalcy of the scene, Emma carefully arranging her Cheerios into patterns, Jake reading the back of the cereal box with intense concentration, felt both precious and fragile in the wake of what had transpired just hours earlier. Karen Henderson had returned home at 2:15 a.m. to find her house secure, her children safe, and Maya sitting calmly in the living room as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. Maya's recounting of the evening's events had been measured and professional, focusing on the facts while downplaying the violence that had been necessary to protect the family. But Karen was not naive, and the subtle signs of confrontation, the replaced coffee table, the carefully swept area where glass had been cleaned up, and the faint scent of cleaning supplies that hadn't been there when she left, told a story that Maya's calm demeanor couldn't entirely conceal. "I need to know exactly what happened," she said now, her voice carrying the controlled intensity of a mother who was beginning to understand how close her children had come to experiencing something that could have changed their lives forever. She had sent Emma and Jake to play in the backyard,
their laughter floating through the open window as they remained blissfully unaware of the serious conversation unfolding in the kitchen. Maya's response revealed the full scope of her capabilities for the first time. She explained her military background in detail, describing her training as a military police officer, her 3 tours in Afghanistan, her specialization in close-quarters combat and threat assessment. She spoke about her transition to civilian life, her work with Dr. Sanchez at the VA hospital, her decision to pursue childcare as a way of channeling her protective instincts in a positive direction. "I've been trained to neutralize threats," Maya explained, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug in a gesture that was both comforting and defensive. "Last night, your children were threatened, and I responded according to my training. The 3 men who broke in were taken into custody without serious injury, but they understood that any attempt to go upstairs would have been met with escalating force." Karen's reaction was complex, a mixture of gratitude, shock, and a dawning realization of what Maya's presence in their lives truly meant. "You're telling me that my babysitter is basically a one-woman security team, and I had no idea." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of David Henderson, who had left work early after receiving Karen's call about the previous night's events. David's background as a criminal defense attorney had given him extensive experience with break-ins and home invasions, and his questions for Maya were pointed and professional. He wanted to know about the use of force, about the potential legal implications, and whether Maya's actions might complicate the prosecution of the 3 suspects. Maya's answers revealed not only her tactical competence, but also her understanding of the legal framework that governs civilian self-defense and the protection of others. She had acted within the bounds of justifiable force, using only the minimum violence necessary to neutralize the threat and protect the children. Her military training had included extensive instruction on the rules of engagement and the legal responsibilities that came with the authority to use force. "The district attorney will want to interview you," David explained, his lawyer's mind already working through the implications of the case. "This isn't just a simple breaking and entering anymore. Your military background and the way you handled the situation will make this a high-profile case, especially if the media gets hold of it." His concern was not just legal but personal. He understood that publicity could complicate Maya's life in ways that might affect her ability to continue caring for children. The first indication that the story was spreading beyond the immediate participants came with a phone call from Officer Mitchell. The 3 suspects had been processed and charged, but their stories about being taken down by some kind of ninja babysitter had created buzz in the police department. Word was spreading through law enforcement channels, and there was growing interest in Maya's background and capabilities. "We've got reporters calling the station," Officer Mitchell explained during her visit to the Henderson house that afternoon. "Someone leaked that a military veteran neutralized 3 armed intruders while babysitting, and now it's being picked up by news outlets. Channel 7 wants to do an interview, and there's talk of national coverage." The officer's tone suggested that she understood both the potential benefits and drawbacks of such attention. Maya's immediate reaction was to decline all media requests, but the story had developed a momentum of its own. By evening, news vans were parked on Maple Street, and neighbors who had never spoken to Maya beyond polite greetings were suddenly eager to share their observations about the quiet young woman who lived above Mrs. Patterson's bakery. Mrs. Patterson herself had become an inadvertent spokesperson for Maya's character, regaling reporters with stories about her tenants' kindness, her dedication to the neighborhood children, her quiet heroism in small daily acts of service. "She's not some kind of action movie character," Mrs. Patterson insisted to anyone who would listen. "She's a sweet girl who reads bedtime stories and makes the best chocolate chip cookies I've ever tasted. She just happens to know how to protect people when they need protecting." The community's reaction to the revelation of Maya's background was varied and revealing. Some families were thrilled to discover that their trusted babysitter possessed capabilities that went far beyond the usual qualifications.
Others were concerned about having someone with combat training around their children, worried that exposure to violence might somehow contaminate the innocence they were trying to preserve. The Morrison family, with their 3 energetic boys, was firmly in the first camp. "Are you kidding me?" laughed Janet Morrison when contacted by a local reporter. "Do you know how hard it is to find someone who can handle my 3 terrors and keep them safe at the same time? Maya's not just a babysitter, she's a superhero." Her husband, Mark, was equally enthusiastic, noting that Maya's military discipline had actually helped their boys develop better behavior and self-control. The Garcias had a more nuanced response. Maria Garcia appreciated Maya's protective capabilities, but worried about the implications of violence, even justified violence, in the lives of their twin daughters. "We want our girls to be safe," she explained to Karen Henderson during a neighborhood gathering, "but we also want them to believe that the world is a good place where conflicts can be resolved without fighting." The community's processing of Maya's revelation occurred against the backdrop of broader conversations about safety, security, and the role of violence in civilian life. The break-in at the Henderson house had shattered the illusion of perfect safety that many residents had taken for granted, forcing them to confront uncomfortable questions about how they would protect their families if faced with similar threats. Dr. Sanchez helped Maya navigate the emotional complexities of her newfound visibility during an emergency therapy session requested by Maya as the media attention intensified. "You're experiencing what many veterans face when their military service becomes public knowledge," Dr. Sanchez explained. "Civilians often have difficulty integrating the idea of a trained warrior with their expectations of caregivers and community members."
The session revealed Maya's deepest fears about the situation, that her military background would overshadow her genuine care for children, that parents would see her as a weapon first and a person second, that the children she loved would begin to view her differently once they understood her capacity for violence. "I don't want Emma and Jake to be afraid of me," Maya confided, her voice carrying a vulnerability that she rarely allowed others to see. Dr. Sanchez's response was both professional and deeply personal. "Children are remarkably good at understanding intention," she said. "Emma and Jake know that you love them and protect them. The fact that you have the skills to do so effectively doesn't change the love. It just makes the protection more reliable." The validation of Maya's approach came from an unexpected source: the 3 suspects themselves. During their arraignment, Marcus Thompson's lawyer had requested a meeting with the district attorney to discuss the circumstances of the arrest. Thompson's account of the confrontation painted Maya not as a vengeful warrior, but as someone who had used precisely the amount of force necessary to stop them without causing permanent harm. "She could have really hurt us," Thompson told his lawyer, his voice carrying a note of respect that surprised everyone in the room. "I've been in fights with cops, with security guards, with other inmates. This lady knew exactly what she was doing, and she pulled her punches. She stopped us, but she didn't try to destroy us." His testimony would later become crucial in establishing that Maya's actions were measured and appropriate rather than excessive. Kevin Martinez's perspective added another layer to the story. His addiction counselor reported that the encounter with Maya had become a turning point in his recovery process. "He keeps talking about how she treated him like a human being even while she was subduing him," the counselor explained. "He said he looked him in the eye afterward and told him that this didn't have to be the end of his story." That kind of recognition from someone who had every right to hate him has been powerful in his treatment. Even Tyler Bennett, the youngest of the 3, had been affected by Maya's approach to the confrontation. His public defender reported that Tyler was cooperating fully with the investigation and had expressed interest in joining the military as an alternative to continued involvement in criminal activity. He said he wanted to learn to protect people instead of threatening them. He was impressed by how she handled the situation and wants to develop that kind of discipline and purpose. The revelation of these impacts began to shift the narrative around Maya's actions from simple crime-stopping heroics to something more complex and meaningful. Local veterans organizations reached out to her, interested in her work with children and her approach to transitioning military skills to civilian service. The VA hospital asked her to speak to other veterans about her experience, recognizing that her story offered a positive model for post-service life. But perhaps the most significant recognition came from the children themselves. Emma Henderson, now fully aware of what had happened that night, had questions that revealed her developing understanding of the complexity of adult responsibilities. "Maya, were you scared when the bad men came?" she asked during one of their regular bedtime story sessions. Maya's answer was honest and age-appropriate. "Yes, sweetheart, I was scared. But I was more determined to keep you and Jake safe than I was afraid of anything the bad men might do." Emma nodded solemnly, processing this information with the seriousness that children bring to revelations about the adult world. Jake's response was characteristically artistic. His new drawings featured Maya not just as a superhero, but as a guardian angel, complete with wings and a halo, standing watch over sleeping children. His latest masterpiece, presented to Maya with great ceremony, showed her in military uniform and civilian clothes simultaneously, as if she instinctively understood that she contained both identities without contradiction.
The school district's reaction to Maya's background was initially cautious, but ultimately positive. Principal Jennifer Walsh at Elmwood Elementary, where several of Maya's babysitting charges attended school, requested a meeting to discuss Maya's continued involvement in school-related activities. The conversation revealed that Maya had been volunteering as a reading tutor and lunch monitor, roles that had made her a familiar and trusted figure among the faculty and students. "The children adore her," Principal Walsh explained to the concerned parents who had requested the meeting. "She's patient, kind, and incredibly responsible. The fact that she has specialized training that allows her to protect children should be seen as an asset, not a liability." The principal's endorsement carried significant weight in the community, helping to reassure parents who might have been concerned about Maya's military background. The law enforcement community's recognition of Maya's actions was both professional and personal. Sergeant Chen recommended Maya for a civilian commendation from the police department, noting that her intervention had prevented what could have been a tragic escalation if the intruders had encountered unprepared civilians. Police Chief Margaret Foster presented the award at a public ceremony, praising Maya's courage, skill, and restraint in protecting innocent children while minimizing harm to all parties involved. But the recognition that meant the most to Maya came from the other babysitters and childcare providers in the community. Led by Mrs. Catherine Douglas, who operated a licensed daycare center and had been caring for children for over 30 years, they presented Maya with a handmade quilt that featured patches created by the children she had cared for. Each patch told a story: Emma's drawing of Maya reading stories, Jake's superhero portrait, the Morrison boys' chaotic but loving tribute to their favorite babysitter. "You've shown all of us what it really means to protect children," Mrs. Douglas said during the presentation ceremony held at the community center. "It's not just about keeping them safe from immediate danger, it's about helping them grow up in a world where they can trust that there are people who will always fight for their right to remain innocent and hopeful." The community's recognition of Maya's dual nature, protector and nurturer, warrior and caregiver, represented a growing understanding that safety and love were not contradictory forces, but complementary aspects of what it meant to truly care for children. The events of that night had revealed not just Maya's capabilities, but also the community's capacity for embracing complexity and recognizing that sometimes the most effective guardians were those who understood both the darkness that could threaten innocence and the light that made that innocence worth protecting. 6 months after the night that changed everything, Maya Chen stood in the gymnasium of Elmwood Elementary School,
watching 30 children between the ages of 6 and 12 practice the basic techniques she had been teaching them in her new children's safety program. The Little Guardians initiative had grown from Maya's original vision into something far more comprehensive and impactful than she had ever imagined possible. Supported by the school district, funded by grants from veterans organizations, and embraced by a community that had learned to see strength and gentleness as complementary rather than contradictory qualities. "Remember, we don't fight to hurt people," Maya called out, as the children practiced their escape techniques. Her approach to children's self-defense was revolutionary in its emphasis on avoidance over confrontation, on building confidence without encouraging aggression, on teaching situational awareness that enhanced rather than diminished their natural trust in the world around them. Emma Henderson, now 5 years old and one of Maya's most dedicated students, had become a perfect example of how children could integrate safety awareness with maintained innocence. She had learned to recognize potentially dangerous situations and to trust her instincts about people and places, but she remained the same curious, trusting child who saw magic in everyday moments and believed that most people were fundamentally good. Her questions during class revealed a developing understanding of complexity. "Maya, if someone is being mean because they're sad, do we still get away from them?"
Maya's answer reflected the nuanced approach that had made her program so successful. "Yes, sweetheart, we still keep ourselves safe, but we can also tell a grown-up who might be able to help the person who's being mean because they're sad." This balance between self-protection and empathy had become the cornerstone of Maya's teaching philosophy, helping children develop what she called smart compassion, the ability to care about others while maintaining appropriate boundaries. The success of the Little Guardians program had attracted attention from beyond Elmwood. Dr. Patricia Sanchez had connected Maya with researchers at the university who were studying the long-term effects of childhood safety education on emotional development and risk assessment skills. Their preliminary findings suggested that children who learned Maya's approach showed increased confidence and decreased anxiety compared to children who received traditional stranger danger education that often left them fearful and confused about navigating social interactions. Jake Henderson, now 7 and reading at a 4th grade level, had channeled his artistic talents into creating illustrated safety guides for younger children. His latest project was a comic book series featuring Guardian Maya, a superhero who taught kids about staying safe while emphasizing that real heroes were people who helped others and never gave up on doing the right thing. The comics had been distributed to schools throughout the district and had caught the attention of a children's book publisher interested in turning Jake's stories into a national series. The transformation in Maya's relationship with the Henderson family reflected the broader changes that had occurred in her life and in the community's understanding of her role. Karen and David Henderson had become not just employers, but true friends and collaborators in Maya's work. David's legal expertise had been invaluable in structuring the safety program to meet liability requirements and educational standards, while Karen's marketing background had helped develop the communication strategies that made the program accessible to parents who might have been initially skeptical. "You've created something that goes far beyond traditional childcare," Karen observed during one of their regular planning meetings for program expansion. "You're teaching children to be their own first line of defense while never losing their ability to trust and connect with others. That's a gift that will serve them for the rest of their lives." Her words reflected the profound respect that had developed between the two women, built on shared dedication to children's well-being and mutual recognition of each other's strengths. The legal resolution of the break-in case had taken months to work through the court system, but the outcome had validated Maya's approach and highlighted the complex factors that contributed to criminal behavior. Marcus Thompson had been sentenced to 2 years in prison,
but was participating in a vocational training program that would help him find employment upon release. His girlfriend had given birth to a healthy daughter, and Maya had surprised everyone by visiting them in the hospital and offering to help connect them with support services. Kevin Martinez had entered a residential treatment program for his addiction and was working toward his GED while participating in therapy that addressed the underlying issues that had led to his criminal behavior. His progress had been remarkable, and his counselor credited the encounter with Maya as a turning point that helped him understand that people could see his potential even when he couldn't see it himself. Tyler Bennett's story had become perhaps the most dramatic transformation. True to his word, he enlisted in the Army National Guard and was excelling in his military training. His letters to Maya, which she shared, with her permission, during her speaking engagements at veterans events, described his growing understanding of what it meant to serve others and protect something larger than himself. His commanding officers had noted his exceptional motivation and leadership potential, qualities that had been dormant during his troubled civilian life.
Your encounter with those 3 young men has created ripple effects that go far beyond that one night, Dr. Sanchez observed during one of their regular sessions. You didn't just stop a crime. You demonstrated a different way of seeing people who make bad choices. That kind of moral leadership has the power to change entire communities. Her professional assessment was supported by the tangible changes that had occurred in Elmwood's approach to juvenile crime prevention and community support for at-risk youth. The establishment of the Elmwood Youth Opportunity Center, which had grown out of community discussions sparked by the break-in incident, represented a fundamental shift in how the community addressed the root causes of criminal behavior. The center offered job training, educational support, counseling services, and mentorship programs designed to provide alternatives for young people who might otherwise turn to criminal activity out of desperation or lack of opportunity. Maya had been asked to serve on the center's board of directors, a role that allowed her to apply her understanding of both individual psychology and community dynamics to the challenge of preventing crime through positive intervention. Her military experience had taught her to think strategically about complex problems, while her work with children had developed her capacity for seeing potential rather than just deficits in young people who had made mistakes. The center's first major success story was a 16-year-old named Angela Rodriguez, who had been arrested for shoplifting and was facing potential juvenile detention. Through the center's intervention program, Angela had been connected with educational support that helped her catch up on missed coursework, job training that led to employment at a local veterinary clinic, and counseling that addressed the family crisis that had contributed to her criminal behavior. 6 months later, Angela was an honorable student who was considering a career in veterinary medicine and had become a peer mentor for other at-risk youth. Maya's role in Angela's transformation had been both direct and indirect. She had worked with Angela as a tutor and mentor, but more importantly, she had helped design the center's approach to intervention based on her understanding that people were more than their worst decisions. Everyone has a story, Maya told the center staff during training sessions. Our job is to help them write a better ending. The success of Maya's various initiatives had attracted national attention from veterans organizations, child advocacy groups, and law enforcement agencies interested in her model of community-based crime prevention. She'd been invited to speak at conferences across the country, sharing her experience of transitioning military skills to civilian service and her approach to building safer communities through education and intervention rather than just enforcement and punishment. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition of Maya's impact came from the daily interactions that had become routine in her life in Elmwood. Children who had never been her students knew her name and waved when they saw her on the street. Parents who had initially been skeptical of her military background now sought her advice on everything from child development to home security. Elderly residents like Mrs. Patterson spoke of feeling safer knowing that Maya was part of their community's fabric. Mrs. Patterson herself had become Maya's strongest supporter and fiercest protector, fielding media requests and managing the increased attention that came with Maya's growing reputation. She's still the same sweet girl who helps me carry groceries and remembers to ask about my arthritis, Mrs. Patterson told reporters, who wanted to focus on Maya's military accomplishments. She just happens to be someone who makes everyone around her a little bit safer and a lot more hopeful. The evolution of Maya's living situation reflected her changing role in the community. She'd moved from the small apartment above the bakery to a house 3 blocks away, a modest 2-bedroom home that allowed her to host Little Guardians meetings and provide space for the mentoring work that had become an increasingly important part of her mission. The house purchase had been made possible by speaking fees and grants related to her work, but Maya had chosen to remain in the same neighborhood where she had first found her place in civilian life. Her new home had quickly become a gathering place for the children she worked with and their families. Weekend barbecues brought together the Henderson family, the Morrisons,
Garcias, and others who would become part of Maya's extended community family. These gatherings served multiple purposes. They provided social connection for Maya, they allowed families to build relationships with each other, and they created opportunities for informal mentoring and support that strengthened the entire community's resilience. The transformation in Maya's personal life had been equally significant. Her relationship with Dr. Rodriguez, a pediatric emergency room physician she had met during a children's safety workshop at the hospital, had developed into something serious and lasting. Dr. Rodriguez understood both Maya's commitment to protecting children and her need to process the complexities of her past experiences. Their relationship was built on mutual respect, shared values, and the kind of deep understanding that comes from both being dedicated to service professions that require personal sacrifice. "Maria gets it," Maya had explained to Mrs. Patterson during one of their regular coffee conversations. "She understands that my work isn't just a job, it's a calling, and she's seen enough trauma in the emergency room to appreciate what it means to prevent it from happening in the first place." The relationship had brought a new dimension of happiness to Maya's life, while supporting rather than competing with her dedication to child safety and community service. The long-term impact of Maya's approach to the break-in incident had become a case study in criminal justice programs across the country. Her demonstration that it was possible to neutralize threats while maintaining humanity toward the people who posed those threats had influenced training programs for law enforcement, security personnel, and civilian self-defense instructors. The concept of protective engagement, using minimum necessary force while preserving the dignity and potential for redemption of all parties involved, had been adopted by several police departments as a model for community-oriented policing. 2 years after that pivotal night, Maya Chen stood before the Elmwood City Council to receive the community's highest civilian honor, the Distinguished Service Award. The citation recognized her not just for her actions during the break-in, but for her ongoing contribution to community safety, youth development, and the model she provided of how military veterans could transition their skills to civilian service in ways that strengthened rather than militarized their communities. In her acceptance speech, Maya returned to the themes that had guided her work from the beginning. Protection isn't about eliminating all risk from children's lives, she said, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had become her trademark. It's about giving them the tools and confidence they need to navigate risks wisely, and ensuring that there are people in their lives who will always fight for their right to grow up safe, loved, and hopeful about the future. The audience that night included Emma and Jake Henderson, now 6 and 8 years old, sitting in the front row with their parents and beaming with pride at their friend and protector. It included Marcus Thompson, who had been released from prison and was working as a counselor at the Youth Opportunity Center, using his own experience to help other young men find alternatives to criminal behavior. It included Tyler Bennett, home on leave from his National Guard unit and wearing his dress uniform as a tribute to the woman who had helped him find his path to service. As Maya looked out at the crowd of people whose lives had been touched by the ripple effects of that night 2 years earlier, she understood that the true measure of her impact wasn't in the immediate action she had taken to protect 2 sleeping children,
but in the ongoing commitment she had made to building a community where all children could sleep safely, where all families could trust in their neighbors' willingness to protect what mattered most, and where even people who made serious mistakes could find paths to redemption and service. The work was far from finished, but the foundation had been laid for something that would outlast any individual contribution. A community that understood that true safety came not from walls and weapons, but from the strength of the bonds between people who cared enough about each other to stand guard over what they shared. 5 years later, Maya Chen stood at the podium of the National Conference on Community Safety and Child Protection, addressing an audience of law enforcement officials, educators,
Social workers, and community leaders from across the United States. The woman who had once been just a babysitter was now Dr. Maya Chen, having completed her doctorate in child development and community psychology through a program specifically designed for military veterans transitioning to civilian leadership roles. Her dissertation, Protective Engagement, Integrating Military Training with Community-Based Child Safety Education, had become required reading in police academies and education programs nationwide. The Little Guardians program that had begun in one elementary school gymnasium now operated in over 200 communities across 37 states. The curriculum Maya had developed had been refined through collaboration with child psychologists, educational specialists, and law enforcement professionals, but its core philosophy remained unchanged. Children could learn to protect themselves while maintaining their capacity for trust, empathy, and hope. Emma Henderson, now 10 years old, sat in the front row of the conference audience not as a child, but as a junior presenter. Her research project on how safety education affects children's confidence and social development had won the state science fair and earned her an invitation to present her findings to the adult experts who gathered to discuss the same issues. Her presentation, delivered with the poise of someone who had grown up understanding that her voice mattered in conversations about her own safety, demonstrated the long-term success of Maya's approach. Kids who learn Guardian Maya's way don't spend their time being scared, Emma explained to the audience of adults who hung on every word from this articulate young researcher. We learn to pay attention to what's happening around us, but we also learn that most people are good and that we can trust the grown-ups who love us to help us stay safe. It makes us feel stronger, not more worried. Jake Henderson, now 12, and having inherited his mother's gift for marketing along with his father's analytical mind, had expanded his Guardian Maya comic book series into a multimedia empire that included an animated television show, a mobile app that taught safety skills through interactive games, and a foundation that provided free safety education materials to underserved communities. His artistic vision had helped make safety education accessible and engaging for children who might have been resistant to more traditional approaches. The 3 young men who had broken into the Henderson house that night so many years ago had each followed different paths, but all had been touched by the ripple effects of their encounter with Maya. Marcus Thompson had completed his college degree while working at the Youth Opportunity Center and had been accepted into a master's program in social work. His testimony about his transformation had become a powerful tool in advocacy for criminal justice reform and community-based intervention programs. Kevin Martinez had celebrated 4 years of sobriety and had opened a small auto repair shop that employed other men and women in recovery. His business had become a model for how formerly incarcerated individuals could build successful enterprises while contributing positively to their communities. He regularly spoke at schools and community centers about the choices that had led to his criminal behavior and the support that had helped him build a different life. Tyler Bennett had completed his military service with distinction and was now a police officer in a neighboring city, specializing in community policing and youth intervention programs. His approach to law enforcement,
influenced by his understanding of how quickly young lives could go off track and how powerful it could be when someone believed in their potential for change, had earned him recognition as an innovative leader in progressive policing strategies. Dr. Patricia Sanchez, now retired from active practice but serving as a consultant on veterans issues, had documented the long-term psychological outcomes of Maya's approach to the break-in incident. Her research had shown that all parties involved, the children who had been protected, the community that had witnessed the event, and even the perpetrators who had been confronted with both accountability and dignity, had experienced positive long-term effects that challenged conventional assumptions about trauma and recovery. Maya's response to that crisis demonstrated something that we're still learning to understand. When we respond to violence with precisely calibrated protection rather than retribution, when we see the humanity in all parties involved while still maintaining clear boundaries about acceptable behavior, we create possibilities for healing and growth that extend beyond the immediate situation.
The Elmwood community had become a model for how neighborhoods could build resilience through connection rather than isolation. The Youth Opportunity Center that had emerged from discussions following the break-in now served as a template for similar programs across the country. Crime rates in Elmwood had dropped significantly, but more importantly, surveys showed that residents felt more connected to each other and more confident in their community's ability to support all of its members. Mrs. Patterson, now 82, but still baking bread every morning and still offering unsolicited advice to anyone who would listen, had become something of a local celebrity as the woman who had first recognized Maya's potential. Her interviews with researchers studying community development had provided insights into how informal networks of support and recognition could nurture individual growth in ways that formal programs sometimes missed. "I didn't see a soldier when I met Maya," Mrs. Patterson explained to a documentary filmmaker who was creating a feature about community-based crime prevention. "I saw a young woman who needed a place to belong and who had something important to offer if we just gave her the chance to share it. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for someone is just see who they really are and let them know that you value it." Maya's marriage to Dr. Maria Rodriguez 3 years earlier had been celebrated by the entire Elmwood community, with Emma and Jake serving as flower girl and ring bearer in a ceremony that felt like a celebration of everything the community had built together. The couple's combined expertise in emergency medicine and child safety had led to collaborations on research projects, studying the prevention of childhood injuries and the development of trauma-informed approaches to pediatric emergency care. Their first child, David Patrick Chen Rodriguez, was born 2 years after their wedding, and Maya's approach to motherhood reflected everything she had learned about protection and nurturing through her work with other people's children. David was being raised in a community that understood that safety came from connection rather than isolation, that protection meant building strength rather than avoiding all risks, and that the most important gift adults could give children was the knowledge that they were valued and worth protecting. The national expansion of Maya's work had brought opportunities for policy influence that she had never anticipated. She had testified before congressional committees studying veterans affairs and juvenile justice reform, sharing her experience as evidence that military veterans could serve as powerful resources for community development, rather than just as individuals needing support services. Her advocacy had contributed to funding increases for programs that helped veterans transition their skills to civilian service roles. But perhaps the most meaningful measure of Maya's impact was visible in the daily rhythms of life in Elmwood and the other communities where her programs operated. Children walked to school with confidence and awareness, but without fear. Parents felt secure in their knowledge that their children possessed both the skills and the community support necessary to navigate an imperfect world safely. Young people who might have turned to criminal activity found mentors and opportunities that channeled their energy toward positive contributions. On her way home from the national conference, Maya stopped by the Henderson house for the weekly family dinner that had become a tradition over the years. Emma was helping her mother prepare salad while discussing her plans for high school courses that would prepare her for a career in child psychology.
Jake was in the backyard with his father building a treehouse that would serve as headquarters for the neighborhood kids' latest adventure game. The scene was ordinary in its extraordinary ordinariness. A family sharing a meal, children growing up surrounded by love and security, adults planning for a future they trusted would be better than the past. But Maya understood that this normalcy was not accidental. It was the result of countless small decisions made by individuals who chose connection over isolation, protection over domination, hope over fear. As she watched Emma carefully arranging vegetables with the same attention to detail that characterized everything she did, Maya remembered the 4-year-old who had asked her to keep the monsters away during that anniversary dinner so many years ago. The monsters had indeed come that night, but they had been met by something stronger than violence. They had encountered a community's determination to protect what mattered most while maintaining its commitment to seeing the humanity in everyone, even those who chose to threaten what was precious. 20 years later, Emma Henderson Chen was delivering the keynote address at the same national conference on community safety and child protection where her mentor had once spoken. Now Dr. Emma Chen, pediatric psychologist and director of the National Institute for Child Safety and Community Resilience, she stood before an audience that included many of the same faces that had gathered to hear Maya speak decades earlier, along with new generations of professionals who had been inspired by the model that Maya had created. My safety education began the night 3 men broke into my house when I was 4 years old, Emma told the audience, her voice carrying the same quiet authority that had made Maya such an effective teacher and leader. I slept through the entire incident, protected by a woman who understood that true safety comes not from eliminating all risks, but from building the strength and wisdom to navigate them successfully. Emma's presentation detailed 2 decades of research on the long-term outcomes of community-based safety education, but her most powerful evidence was her own life and the lives of the thousands of children who had grown up in programs inspired by Maya's approach. We are not a generation raised in fear. We are a generation raised in awareness, confidence, and connection to communities that value our safety because they value our potential. Maya Chen, now 67 years old and officially retired, but still serving as an advisor to safety programs across the country, sat in the audience with tears in her eyes as she listened to the young woman she had protected that night so many years ago. Beside her sat Jake Henderson, now a successful filmmaker whose documentaries about community resilience had won international recognition, and their families, children and grandchildren who had inherited a world made safer by the choices their elders had made. The 3 men who had unknowingly changed the course of so many lives through their attempted burglary had also been invited to the conference, not as criminals, but as examples of how people could transform their mistakes into contributions. Marcus Thompson, now a respected professor of social work, had spent his career studying the factors that led young people toward or away from criminal behavior. Kevin Martinez had become a successful entrepreneur whose businesses provided employment and training for people re-entering society after incarceration. Tyler Bennett, retired from a distinguished career in law enforcement, had developed training programs that taught officers how to see potential rather than just problems in the communities they served. Their presence at the conference represented one of Maya's most important insights, that redemption was possible for everyone, that people were more than their worst decisions, and that communities became stronger when they chose transformation over punishment, healing over vengeance. As the conference concluded, Maya found herself surrounded by the extended family that had grown from that single night of protection and choice. The Henderson children, now adults with children of their own, still called her guardian Maya with the same affection they had shown as small children learning to navigate the world safely. Mrs. Patterson's granddaughter, now a social worker in Seattle, had named her own daughter Maya in honor of the woman who had shown her community how to turn crisis into catalyst for positive change.
The legacy that had begun with a military police officer's decision to babysit some neighborhood children had grown into a movement that touched millions of lives, changed how communities thought about safety and protection, and demonstrated that the most powerful responses to violence were often rooted in love rather than retribution.
Dr. Maria Rodriguez Chen, Maya's wife of over 20 years, took her hand as they walked together toward their car in the conference center parking lot. Their own children, David, now in college studying community development, and their daughter Sarah, a high school student who had inherited her mother's protective instincts and her stepmother's healing touch, were already planning their own contributions to the work that had defined their family's mission. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't been at the Henderson house that night?" Maria asked as they drove through the quiet streets of the city where the conference had been held. Maya considered the question seriously, as she always did when people asked about the paths not taken, the choices that had shaped not just her life, but the lives of so many others. "I think about it sometimes," she admitted, "but I've learned that the most important moments in our lives often seem ordinary when they're happening. I was just doing my job that night, protecting children who had been entrusted to my care. Everything else grew from that simple commitment." As they drove toward the airport for their flight home to Elmwood, Maya watched the city lights blur past the window and thought about all the communities across the country where children were sleeping safely in their beds, protected not just by locks and alarms, but by networks of people who understood that every child's safety was everyone's responsibility. The work continued, would always continue, carried forward by new generations of protectors who understood that the most effective way to keep monsters away was to build communities strong enough to transform monsters into human beings capable of redemption, and to raise children confident enough in their own worth and strength that they could navigate an imperfect world with wisdom, courage, and hope. 40 years after that pivotal night, the story had become legend in Elmwood and inspiration in communities across the globe. The small house at 1247 Maple Street bore a historical marker, recognizing it as the birthplace of the modern community safety movement. But the real monument to Maya's legacy was visible in the confident stride of children walking to school, the quick smiles exchanged between neighbors who knew they could count on each other, and the quiet assurance of parents who understood that their children were growing up in a world where protection and love were not competing forces, but complementary aspects of the same sacred commitment. Emma Henderson Chen's daughter, 4-year-old Maya Chen Henderson, was playing in the same backyard where her mother and uncle had once built tree houses and dreamed of adventures. As evening approached and her parents called her inside for dinner, little Maya looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky and whispered a prayer her grandmother had taught her. "Thank you for all the guardian angels who keep children safe, especially the ones who look like regular people but have superhero hearts." In communities across the country and around the world, other children were whispering similar prayers, growing up in the knowledge that they were valued, protected, and empowered to face whatever challenges the future might bring. The ripples from that single night of courage and choice continued to spread, creating waves of positive change that would touch generations yet to be born. Inside the community center, a familiar figure caught Maya's attention. Marcus Thompson, now 75 and walking with the aid of a cane, but still possessing the sharp mind that had made him one of the country's most respected voices on criminal justice reform, was setting up a display about the Youth Opportunity Center. Beside him worked his granddaughter, Sophia, a recent graduate of Harvard Law School who had just been accepted into the Peace Corps to help establish community safety programs in rural Guatemala. "Professor Thompson," Maya called out, using the title he had earned through decades of academic work that had grown from his personal transformation. The two embraced with the warmth of old friends who had traveled an impossible journey together. "Dr. Chen," Marcus replied,
with a smile that carried both respect and genuine affection. Or should I say, Grandmother Maya? He gestured toward the small child holding Maya's hand. 3-year-old Isabella Chen Rodriguez, Maya and Maria's adopted granddaughter, whose parents had been killed in a car accident 6 months earlier. The adoption had been immediate and unanimous among the extended family that had grown around Maya over the decades. Isabella looked up at Marcus with the curious intensity that Maya remembered from all the children who had passed through her programs. "Are you one of the men who tried to hurt Grandma Maya when she was young?" she asked, with the directness that only small children possessed. Marcus knelt down to Isabella's level, his weathered face gentle and patient. "I was, sweetheart. I made some very bad choices when I was young because I was scared and didn't know how to ask for help. But your Grandma Maya helped me learn how to make better choices, and now I spend my time helping other people learn the same thing." Isabella nodded solemnly, processing this information with the seriousness she brought to all new concepts. "So you were a bad guy who became a good guy?" she asked. "I was a hurt person who learned how to become a healing person," Marcus corrected gently. "Sometimes the most important thing we can learn is that people can change if they really want to, and if other people believe they can." Across the room, Kevin Martinez was adjusting a display about his automotive training program that had grown from a single shop into a nationwide network of businesses that specifically hired people with criminal records. At 68, Kevin had become one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the state. But more important to him, his programs had helped over 3,000 formerly incarcerated individuals build stable, productive lives. Tyler Bennett, now retired after 30 years in law enforcement, was surrounded by a group of young police officers who had come to learn about his community policing strategies. His approach, influenced by that long-ago encounter with Maya, had been adopted by departments across the country and had contributed to significant reductions in police-involved violence while improving community trust in law enforcement. "The key," Tyler was explaining to the young officers, "is to remember that every person you encounter is someone's child, someone's parent, someone's sibling. They might be making terrible choices in that moment, but they're still human beings with the potential for something better. Your job is to stop the harmful behavior while preserving their dignity and their possibility for change." Emma Henderson Chen, now 54 and Director Emeritus of the National Institute for Child Safety and Community Resilience, moved through the crowd with the confident grace that had characterized her since childhood. Her own children, twin daughters who were now in their 20s and working as social workers in urban communities, were helping coordinate the international delegation that had come to study the Elmwood model. "Aunt Maya," Emma called out, using the honorary title that had evolved naturally over the decades, "the delegation from Kenya wants to know if you'll have time to answer some questions about adapting the Little Guardians curriculum for communities affected by civil conflict." Maya nodded, though she couldn't help but marvel at how far her simple approach to children's safety had traveled. The program now operated in 47 countries, adapted for different cultural contexts, but always maintaining the core principle that children could learn to protect themselves while preserving their capacity for trust and connection. Jake Henderson, now 52, and recently returned from filming a documentary about community resilience in post-conflict Bosnia, was setting up the multimedia presentation that would serve as the evening centerpiece. His Guardian Maya comic book series had been translated into over 30 languages, and the animated series continued to introduce new generations of children to safety concepts through storytelling rather than fear-based messaging. "The most amazing thing," Jake told a reporter who was covering the anniversary celebration, "is that Aunt Maya never set out to change the world. She just wanted to keep 2 kids safe for one night. But when you do the right thing with that kind of commitment and integrity, the ripple effects just keep spreading." Dr. Maria Rodriguez Chen, now 70 and recently retired from her position as Chief of Pediatric Emergency Medicine at the Regional Medical Center, found Maya in the crowd and slipped her hand into her wife's with the comfortable intimacy of 50 years together.
Their relationship had been one of the stabilizing forces that had allowed Maya to give so much of herself to the community while maintaining her own emotional and psychological health. "The mayor's here," Maria whispered, "along with the governor and what looks like half the state legislature. I think the celebration might be bigger than you anticipated." She held up one of the drawings, created by a 7-year-old in Mumbai who had learned conflict resolution skills through a Little Guardians program adapted for urban India. This little artist drew herself standing between two classmates who were arguing, helping them work out their problem peacefully. That's what real safety looks like. Not the absence of all conflict, but the presence of people who know how to handle conflict constructively. Maya's speech touched on the evolution of her understanding about protection and community, but she kept returning to the fundamental insight that had guided her work. Children need to know that they are valued enough to be protected, capable enough to protect themselves, and connected enough to protect others. When we give them all three of those things, we raise a generation that makes the world safer for everyone. The evening's most emotional moment came when Maya called Marcus, Kevin, and Tyler to join her on stage. "These 3 men taught me one of the most important lessons of my life," she said, her arm around Marcus's shoulders while the other 2 men stood beside them. "They taught me that there's no such thing as a throwaway person, that everyone deserves a chance to write a better ending to their story, and that sometimes the people who have made the biggest mistakes become the most effective helpers because they understand what it feels like to need a second chance." Marcus took the microphone with hands that trembled slightly with age and emotion. "Dr. Chen could have ended our stories that night 50 years ago," he said, his voice carrying across the silent auditorium. "Instead, she chose to help us begin new chapters. The work that she's done, the lives that have been changed, the communities that have been transformed, none of it would have been possible if she had chosen vengeance over mercy that night." The celebration continued late into the evening, with breakout sessions where international visitors could learn about specific aspects of the Elmwood model, workshops for young people interested in community organizing, and informal conversations that wove together personal stories and professional insights. Maya found herself in a quiet corner with Isabella on her lap, watching the child color in a book while the celebration swirled around them. Emma's youngest daughter, 5-year-old Grace, was curled up beside them, having fallen asleep despite the noise and excitement. "Grandma Maya," Isabella said without looking up from her coloring, "when I grow up, can I help keep children safe like you do?" Maya stroked the little girl's hair, thinking about the cycles of protection and care that had sustained this community for half a century. "You're already helping keep children safe, sweetheart. Every time you're kind to another child, every time you tell a grown-up when someone needs help, every time you include someone who's being left out, you're making the world safer for children." Isabella nodded seriously and returned to her coloring, carefully staying within the lines of a picture that showed children from different backgrounds holding hands around a globe. The image was simple, but Maya recognized in it the same vision that had guided her work for decades. A world where differences were celebrated, where conflicts were resolved peacefully, and where every child could grow up knowing they were valued and protected. As the evening wound down and the last visitors departed, Maya found herself alone in the community center with Maria, Emma, Jake, and the 3 men whose lives had intersected with hers on that pivotal night so many years ago. They sat in a circle of folding chairs, sharing stories and memories, while the maintenance crew cleaned up around them. "Do you remember," Jake asked with a smile, "when Maya used to check every window and door before Mom and Dad left us with her? We thought she was just being extra careful." "I was being extra careful. I just didn't realize at the time that I was also being trained by the best teachers in the world. You children showed me what was really worth protecting." Kevin, who had been quiet for much of the evening, finally spoke up. "I've never properly thanked you, not just for stopping us that night, but for how you stopped us. You could have hurt us badly.
could have made sure we went away for years, could have treated us like the criminals we were trying to become. Instead, you treated us like human beings who had made terrible choices but could still choose differently.
Tyler nodded in agreement. I've worked with hundreds of young people over the years who were heading down the same path we were on. Every time I can help one of them turn around, I think about that night and how you showed us a different way to think about ourselves and our possibilities. Marcus, ever the philosopher after decades of academic work, offered his own reflection. What you created here in Elmwood wasn't just a safety program or even a community model. You created a demonstration of what's possible when people choose connection over separation, when they choose to see potential rather than just problems, when they choose hope over fear as their guide for building the future. As they prepared to leave, Maya walked through the community center one last time, looking at the displays that chronicled 5 decades of growth and change. Photos showed children who had grown up to become teachers, social workers, police officers, parents, and community leaders. Articles documented the spread of Little Guardians programs to new continents and the adaptation of community policing strategies to different cultural contexts. But the display that caught her attention was simpler and more personal. A collection of thank you notes from families whose children had participated in her programs over the years. The notes were handwritten on construction paper, typed on formal letterhead, scrawled in crayon by small hands, and composed in dozens of languages. Each one told a story of a child who had learned to feel safer, more confident, more capable of navigating the world with wisdom and courage. One note, written in careful cursive by a now-adult woman in Nigeria, read, "Dear Guardian Maya, I learned from your program when I was 8 years old. Now I am a teacher, and I use what you taught me to help my students feel safe and strong. My daughter will learn from your program too. Thank you for showing us that protection comes from love, not fear." As Maya turned off the lights and locked the community center, she reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her from that young woman folding dinosaur pajamas in a suburban living room to this moment of celebration and legacy. The path had not always been easy. There had been challenges, setbacks, moments of doubt and grief, but it had been guided throughout by a simple principle that had never failed her. When in doubt, choose love. The drive home took them past 1247 Maple Street, where the historical marker glowed softly in the streetlight. The house looked much the same as it had 50 years ago, though it was now home to a young family with children who attended the current iteration of Little Guardians classes. Maya smiled, thinking about the children sleeping safely inside, protected not just by locks and alarms, but by a community that had learned to value safety as a shared responsibility. At home, Maya and Maria sat on their porch with cups of tea, watching the stars emerge in the clear autumn sky. Isabella had fallen asleep in Maya's lap during the drive home, and Maya was reluctant to disturb her by carrying her in. "What are you thinking about?" Maria asked, recognizing the thoughtful expression that meant her wife was processing the evening's events. "I'm thinking about how many nights I've sat on this porch over the years, worrying about the children and my programs, planning new curriculum, wondering if we were really making a difference. Tonight, I finally feel like I can stop worrying. The work is bigger than any one person now. It's going to continue and grow and adapt long after we're gone." Maria nodded, understanding the significance of Maya's words. For 50 years, Maya had carried the weight of responsibility for the safety and well-being of countless children. Tonight's celebration had demonstrated that the responsibility was now shared among thousands of people around the world who had embraced the principles that Maya had developed and who would carry them forward to new generations. As they prepared for bed, Maya checked on Isabella one last time, watching the little girl sleep with the peaceful security of a child who knew she was loved and protected. Tomorrow, Isabella would begin her own journey of learning about safety and strength, guided by the same principles that had protected and empowered thousands of children before her. Maya's last thought before sleep was a prayer of gratitude for the children who had taught her what was worth protecting, for the community that had supported her vision, for the colleagues who would help transform that vision into reality, and for the unexpected grace that had allowed 3 desperate young men to become lifelong partners in building a safer, more compassionate world.
50 years after that pivotal night, the work continued.
In classrooms around the world, children were learning that they were valuable and capable. In police stations and community centers, adults were learning to see potential rather than just problems. In legislative chambers and policy institutes, leaders were discovering that investment in connection and support was more effective than investment in punishment and separation. The ripples from that single night of choice continued to spread, creating waves of positive change that would touch generations yet to be born. And somewhere in Elmwood, in a house that had once been the site of attempted crime but had become instead the birthplace of hope, new children were sleeping safely, dreaming dreams that were a little brighter because one woman had chosen to protect them not just from immediate danger, but from the fear that could have shaped their understanding of the world. The story that had begun with broken glass and broken dreams had become something beautiful, a testament to the power of choice, the possibility of redemption, and the truth that love, when guided by wisdom and strengthened by courage, could indeed change the world, one child, one family, one community at a time. In the quiet suburb of Elmwood, as in countless communities around the globe, guardian angels with human faces continued their eternal vigil, ensuring that children could sleep safely, while dreaming of all the good they would do when they awakened to a world made safer by those who had come before them. The circle was complete, but the story would never end.